What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Michael and welcome to FudgeMuppet, a place filled to the brims with Elder Scrolls lore, discussions, and big open world role-playing games. If you're a subscriber or you're just a huge fan of Elder Scrolls lore and you stumbled upon this video, then you'll know just how crazy the Elder Scrolls timeline can be. It's filled with a multitude of events to make sense of, often with varying versions of the truth, and many factions and figures who are living under conditions caused by the actions of those who lived eras beforehand. If you've watched part 1 of 4 mortals who forever changed Tamriel, the 4 mortals in this video, as the name suggests, will indeed be mortals and not gods, even if they ascended to godhood or something of that nature later on. The list isn't ordered, it won't include main characters such as the Dragonborn, and the focus is on characters who did things causing change as opposed to just solely having significance. It's a bit like the butterfly effect, except instead of a really small change or action affecting the future in a significant way, it's big actions affecting the future in an even bigger way. Many of these mortals didn't live to see just how large of an impact they created on the timeline, but luckily for us Elder Scrolls fans who exist outside of their timeline, we get to study it all to our heart's content. As I often say in the conclusion of the videos that most people don't get to, it warms my heart to know there are viewers out there who love the Elder Scrolls universe as much as we do here at FudgeMuppet. If you're really getting into this stuff and want more, definitely do subscribe, but either way, I'd love to read about your favorite characters on the timeline in the comments below, so let me know, and also tell me if you want a part 3. Some of the mortals featuring in this video have been discussed in expansive lore videos we've made, so we decided to actually link any related content in the description for your convenience. Now let's strap ourselves in for an epic journey all around Nirn as we uncover 4 mortals who forever changed Tamriel. First up, we've got a Yokudan hero, a man renowned as the greatest sword singer of all time, and the author of the Book of Circles, Fran Dahl. Let's hear his story first, so we can understand why he's had such an impact on the Elder Scrolls timeline. Fran Dahl was born in the 720th year of the First Era, in the province of Yokuda known as High Desert. As you may know, Yokuda is a continent located west of Tamriel, but it has since sunk into the sea, leaving only a handful of small islands behind. When Fran Dahl was born, it was a massive landmass, with rocky terrain and an extremely arid climate. The Yokudans lived in a culture that was extremely warrior-oriented, and therefore it is of no surprise that Fran Dahl's family lived through constant civil wars waged between various groups over land and authority. Interestingly, Fran Dahl's grandfather led many of the battles for the unification of Yokuda, serving the Elder Yokuda Mansell Censet. The Elder Yokuda is basically the military dictator of Old Yokuda, and for 8 years he succeeded in gaining control of almost the entire empire. However, he was assassinated in the year 617, so this is before Fran Dahl's birth. A commoner named Randik Torn replaced him, and his rule was actually much more peaceful and occurred during Fran Dahl's early life. Fran Dahl was forced to look after his mother and 4 brothers at the age of 14 after his father died, but due to his great swordsmanship, this wasn't that hard. Even at this stage, his skills made him desired as a guardian and escort. As I said, things were still somewhat peaceful during Randik's rule, but this peace was short-lived. When Fran Dahl was 17, Randik died, and the empire descended into civil war again. This was the catalyst for Fran Dahl becoming a true master warrior. At the peak of turmoil, Fran Dahl had turned himself into a sword singer and master Ansei. His skills were constantly tested, he took part in duels as he aged, and he became very famous, following the path of the sword in search of enlightenment. He was still doing this by the age of 30 and had slain all his opponents, winning more than 90 duels. He became so powerful that he began using the Shihai, a sword made from his own spirit, instead of a real one. Not only did he win duels, he spent much of his time traveling Yokuda, killing monsters and groups of brigands, and also had his only son, Divad. However, Fran Dahl ended up becoming a hermit, living in a cave on Hatu Mountain and creating his philosophy on the way of the sword. He did this after defeating an opponent named Lord Janik, as after this many wins he believed he was unbeatable. His philosophies were written down and eventually became the Book of Circles, which he wrote over a 30-year time frame, and the book encompassed 38 grips, 750 offensive and 1800 defensive positions, and nearly 9,000 moves essential to sword mastery. Anyways, so an emperor named Emperor Hira began hunting down all the sword singers and even killed Fran Dahl's wife, and then Fran Dahl's son Divad sought out his father, who he'd lived much of his life separated from, and came to him in the year 780, seeking leadership in a war against Hira. Fran Dahl was hesitant to see more lives lost, but after After being convinced, Hunding led the Singers in 7 different battles, outnumbered 30-1. Less than 20,000 Singers survived, and Hera's forces were smashed, with more than 300 fighters killed that day. However, Hunding and the remaining Singers realized they weren't really welcome in the Desert Empire anymore. Hunding led the Sword Singers to a great port city in the province of Seawind, and they all left on a flotilla of ships. Luckily, they avoided the fate of Yakuta mostly sinking, which happened in the 792nd year of the First Era, and they arrived in Hammerfell in the year 808. This wave of warriors traveling from Yakuta to Hammerfell were known as the Regatta, and there were actually 4 successive waves, making up the mass colonization of Hammerfell. This story pretty much sums up why Fran Dahl is so impactful. It was he who brought the Red Guards to Hammerfell, as well as the Swordslinger culture and warrior culture which is so prevalent in their society to this day. I will note that in Elder Scrolls Online, lore appears to have been added which suggests that some Yakutans were believed to have migrated to Hammerfell earlier from the Yakutan island of Akos Kazaz, sometime in the early 6th century of the same era. However, whatever the case may be, Fran Dahl deserves the credit for actually creating impact, for he brought the warrior culture and a huge amount of Yakutans who would take over Hammerfell, pushing out many groups of Nedic people as well as giant goblin tribes, and building a civilization there in Tamriel. Fran Dahl died fighting the goblins, but his legacy lives on, and he is still revered by the Redguard people to this day. It should be noted that these Redguard people are assumed to be biologically the same as the Yakutans and have simply become known by a different name. The city of Port Hunding on Stros Mackay is named after him, and there are many statues and shrines of him throughout the land. There's also a holiday honoring him on the 5th of Frostfall. His tome, the Book of Circles, is studied by Redguard warriors to this day, and each house in Hammerfell has an alcove by its hearth, just big enough to hold a copy of the book. Much of the Yakutan pantheon brought with them is still followed to this day by Redguard people, and many aim to recreate Yakutan culture in Hammerfell as much as possible. Much of the extremely rich culture has been lost though, however plenty still remains, and the focus on swordsmanship due to Fran Dahl has been monumentally significant. For example, during the Great War, the powerful Redguards were able to use their skill and attitude towards battle to fight on against the Thalmor in spite of the Empire giving up, and eventually they pushed the Aldmeri invasion away, leading to the Second Treaty of Stros Mackay. Some Redguards resent the Empire for giving up, believing they would have beat the Aldmeri Dominion if they'd kept fighting. In a nutshell, almost all of Redguard history on Tamriel throughout all the eras has occurred largely thanks to Fran Dahl. His actions ultimately led to the creation of the Forebears and the Crowns, the various internal dynamics within Hammerfell, and the province's external interactions with High Rock, the Orcs, Skyrim, and various empires. It is Fran Dahl who brought the Yakutan and therefore Redguard people, culture, and attitudes to Tamriel, and helped to produce arguably the most powerful warrior techniques ever used. Next up, we've got a man of great significance whose origins are shrouded in mystery, with different sources claiming different things. This man is Riemann Cyrodiil, and regardless of the theories which surround his birth, there is no doubt that this Imperial's actions had a large impact on the Elder Scrolls universe. Riemann Cyrodiil was born late in the First Era, and grew up to be an influential Colovian general. He was responsible for uniting the 2 separate groups of the Colovians and the Nibonese, who came together under his banner to team up against the common enemy, the first Akaviri invasion. This invasion was almost entirely carried out by the Saisi, a race of serpentine-like people from Akavir. The Akaviri invasion occurred in the 2703rd year of the First Era, although they had scouted out the area and raided islands around the Iliac Bay region as early as the 800th year. The year prior to the main invasion, in 2702, they also raided High Rock, with the people of Wayrest forced to take refuge behind city walls. In 2703, the main forces arrived and hit from the north, slaughtering their way through armies of Nords in Skyrim and spreading their invasion to other northern provinces like Morrowind and High Rock. Riemann made alliances with the armies of said provinces, supposedly gaining help from Vivek and the forces of Morrowind and from the kingdom of Daggerfall with the defense of High Rock. He engaged the Akaviri forces in Skyrim, creating a vast network of fortifications throughout the province in the process. This all led to a very important event, the Battle of Pale Pass. Pale Pass is located up in the Dural Mountains. Here, Riemann came prepared, believing the Akaviri army was prepared to cross the mountains into Cyrodiil. He had received intel, or rather heard rumors you could say, that the Akaviri command was in a hidden outpost within the Pale Pass, and he wanted to cut them off from the rest of the army. Luckily for Riemann, and unbeknownst to him, the Akaviri commanders were trapped within the fort here due to an avalanche, which left their main force isolated within the pass itself, cut off from their leadership. Here, Riemann launched his assault, and apparently Vivek's forces helped by moving in from the north, cutting the Akaviri off. The battle began, but did not last too long, as the Akaviri army surrendered upon hearing Riemann's voice. They fell to their knees and swore their lives to him, for they had realized he was Dragonborn, and it turns out they had come to Tamriel in search of the Chosen One, the Dragonborn. What Riemann did next makes him extremely significant, and it changed Tamriel forever. You see, they may have been the enemies, but Riemann was still impressed by their weaponry and combat skills. He wasn't foolish, so he decided to incorporate these powerful Saisi who would be loyal to him into his ranks. They became an important part of Riemann's army and had a large influence on the Riemann dynasty and the empire as a whole. So yes, he's significant for stopping the Akaviri from taking over huge parts of Tamriel, but more so for the changes that occurred after he let them join him. Upon his victory, Riemann Cyrodiil more or less birthed the Second Empire, as he had stopped the humans of Tamriel from fighting amongst each other and united them under one banner. His dynasty went on to take over most of the other provinces of Tamriel, with the exceptions of Morrowind and Alinor, with the help of Akaviri who advised him and made up parts of his army. The best and wisest Akaviri then became the Dragon Guard, who served Riemann Cyrodiil and his descendants, his dynasty. The Dragon Guard would later disband, but then turn into the faction you all know, the Blades. So without Riemann Cyrodiil, you don't have any of the important actions involving the Blades. You don't have them protecting the Emperor, you don't have Skyhaven Temple and Alduin's Wall, and all the Akaviri aesthetic and cultural influence wouldn't exist either. You can thank Riemann Cyrodiil for your Blades armor and flashy katanas too. So there were Akaviri advising throughout the Riemann dynasty, but the Second Empire can actually be split into two periods, the Riemann dynasty period and the Akaviri potentate period. The second period, which was only possible due to Riemann's decision to incorporate the Akaviri into Cyrodiilic forces and culture, involved the assassination of Riemann III and his son by the Morag Tong, and the subsequent rule of the Second Empire by a Saisi named Visidju She. Visidju She and his son would rule Tamriel in the Second Empire for nearly 200 years, and potentate Visidju She is known to have created the Fighters Guild, as well as the Guilds Act, which led to the creation of many other guilds by legally sanctioning them under imperial law. The Morag Tong would strike again though, taking out the final Akaviri leader, the son, Savirian Chorak, and all of his heirs in a single night. This led to the end of the Second Empire, making way for the Third Empire created by Tiber Septim, and also before this, the period of time in between, known as the Interregnum. This period involved various political squabbles, uprisings, events, and wars, such as everything that occurs during the Elder Scrolls Online. To think all of this happened largely due to Riemann Cyrodiil originally uniting Clovians and Nibonese to help fight against the Akaviri invaders. He truly was a mortal who forever changed Tamriel, and afterwards was revered as a kind of god. Third on the list, we finally have an elf. A mer who Scott told me it would be a crime not to include. I don't want to be called criminal scum anytime soon, and I honestly do agree that none other than Veloth deserves a well-earned spot on this list. Do note that if you want a super comprehensive account of Veloth's story, we have a video recently created linked in the description for your viewing pleasure. Veloth was an Oldmer, that is the proto-race of elves who arrived in the Somerset Isles in the Merethic era after fleeing from a crisis on their home continent, Old Meris. The Oldmer would go on to become the various races of elves we can play in Skyrim today, and much of this occurred due in part to the findings of Topple the Pilot, who, as I explained in part 1 of 4 Mortals Who Forever Changed Tamriel, navigated a ship around the continent and mapped out the lands, bringing home the information to the rest of the Oldmer at home in the Isles. However, while Topple's actions were instrumental to the establishment of various elven races and cultures, Veloth acted as a much more significant catalyst for the creation of the Dark Elf race, as well as their predecessors, was the Chimer. So let's talk about who Veloth was and what kind of society he lived in. Well, the Oldma society was one that worshipped ancestors. They were very aware their ancestors were divine, godlike spirits. However, their worship was not restricted to the most powerful beings, at least originally. To begin with, the Oldma had a reverence for all their ancestors, and this belief system was widespread across their civilization. However, as time went by, like in all societies, cultural and religious beliefs started undergoing a gradual change, and it wasn't long before massive schisms had been created in Oldma religion and spirituality. A new concept had been gaining popularity, which proposed that only the most powerful of ancestors should be worshipped, and these ancestors were the powerful Adric gods we know of today, who are still found in various pantheons across multiple provinces, worshipped by all different races all over Tamriel. Many Oldma, however, did not like this concept, for it went against the beliefs they'd held for their entire lives. They did not think ancestors should be ranked in power, with some excluded from worship and others not. To put things in perspective, think about the lifespan of an Oldma. You could be 200 years old and have worshipped your ancestors in a specific way for your entire life. Then new ideas start coming in, trying to tell you that you should only worship the most powerful of your ancestors and no longer revere the rest, including immediate ancestors such as your grandparents. You'd be a bit resistant to that ideology, wouldn't you? Then when a prophet such as Veloth comes along preaching fundamental ancestor worship with a desire for you to follow him as he seeks out a new home for people like you who believe in the old ways, it would be a tempting proposition. Veloth was one of those who didn't want to change his beliefs and wanted to preserve the current worship of ancestors. He wanted to live in a world of tradition, discipline, justice, and honesty. His view definitely resonated with other Oldma who began to follow his word, and these followers of his would be known as the Velothi. However, because the Velothi were directly opposed to the new society and the beliefs that had been imposed, they had to operate in secrecy, conducting themselves with secret methods who were taught to them very interestingly by the Daedra. The Daedric prince Boethia helped Veloth, showing him a new way forward. He inscribed the Velothi principles, which told of abandoning Aedra worship and worshipping the good Daedra instead. These were Boethia, Azura, and Mephala, and each one helped the Velothi on their journey to carve out a new life. The prophecies also contained methods of attaining divinity, which was at the core of Velothi philosophy. Where the elves of the Somerset Isles saw creation as an evil trap by the trickster god Lorcan, Veloth and his people saw mortality as a challenge, an obstacle to transcend through enlightenment. Boethia helped Veloth with his plan to execute a great exodus to Morrowind. Azura is said to have taught the Velothi to be different, to become the Chimer and break away from Old Mary culture, and Mephala is said to have taught them many secret arts, such as operating their society covertly and protecting themselves through assassination and manipulation. We don't have time to cover the entire story of the Exodus, but very notably, when Veloth and his people tried to leave, there was an attempt to stop them by Trinamach's followers, Oldma, who were highly devout to the Aedra. Here Boethia appeared, coming to the rescue of Veloth, eating Trinamach and excreting him as Malakath, changing his followers into the Orcs. And so Veloth went to Morrowind, and high Velothi culture was born, with great temples built in honor of the three good Daedra. Boethia is credited with their cultural advances, as well as teaching magic, spirituality, and responsible architecture. Amazing Chimer structures still exist in Morrowind to this day, and a lot of modern day Dunmer architecture is built from it, so you can thank Boethia and Veloth's decision to go on a great exodus for this sick aesthetics. What you can also thank him for is all the cool history involving the events of the Tribunal and everything involving Morrowind and the Dark Elves, really. So after becoming the Chimer and starting civilization in Morrowind, which they called Resdane, they became at odds, mainly due to ideological differences, with the Dwemer, the Dwarves. Velothi culture also fell prey to infighting and split up into various groups, eventually forming the factions of the Great Houses and the Ashlanders. Interestingly, the Chimer and Dwemer would eventually team up against the common enemy, the Nords of Skyrim. This led to around 300 years of peace before the War of the First Council occurred. The Dwemer mysteriously vanish, Nerevar meets his death, and the Tribunal gods rise to power. The good Daedra were made to be the Anticipations, Veloth was canonized as a saint, and the Chimer are cursed for abandoning the good Daedra, later referred to as the Reclamations, and turned into the Dark Elves by Azura as a result. In summary, Veloth's decision decision to embark on a great exodus to Morrowind with his Aldmer followers led to the Kaima, the Tribunal, and ultimately the Dunmer and all of the moments following in Morrowind's history. And finally, we arrive at one of my favorite mortals who definitely changed Tamriel forever, although the far-reaching impacts are yet to be seen in their full magnitude. Theorized to be a dragonborn, I'd like to introduce an elf you'd be familiar with from Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, Mancar Cameron. Allegedly the illegitimate son of Cameron the Usurper and his Bosma mistress, Mancar was born and raised in Valenwood within a war refugee shelter. His supposed father was leading a vicious war across multiple provinces, and all we know of his mother was that she left him in the refugee shelter and never returned. Like his father, Mancar would go on to become an extremely powerful mage. He was especially talented at understanding various realms and planes of existence, and had a keen interest in the Daedra. Eventually, whether it was in Tamriel or in Oblivion, Mancar was given the Mysterium Xarxes by Mehrunes Dagon, a powerful tome which allowed him to create a realm of his own, named Paradise or Gaia Alata. This realm looks like a paradise, and followers of Mancar go here when they die. Sadly for them, looks are misleading and they're forced to be tortured for all eternity, even being resurrected to be tortured more if they somehow die. But who are the followers of Mancar? Well, after using the Mysterium Xarxes to create his paradise, Mancar Cameron founded an order known as the Mythic Dawn and made its shrine in northeastern Cyrodiil deep in the Lake Arius caverns. He then wrote his infamous series of texts, the Mythic Dawn Commentaries, hiding directions to his shrine within its pages. The Mythic Dawn worshipped Mehrunes Dagon, the Daedric Prince of Destruction, and they believed in a prophecy which claimed that a time would come where Tamriel and Oblivion would become part of one realm again, as it was in the Dawn era. For this to occur, the gates to Oblivion must be opened, and to achieve this, the dragonfires must be extinguished in the Temple of the One in the Imperial City. As you'd likely know, putting out these fires isn't as simple as throwing some holy water on top of it. You've got to make sure there's no heirs to the throne crowned, no one to wear the Amulet of Kings, keeping the barrier between Mundus and Oblivion shut, a barrier created by the pact Alesia made with Akatosh long ago. A desired outcome of the cult was to have Mehrunes Dagon walk again on Tamriel, and they referred to this as the Time of Gates and also the Time of Cleansing. Mancar Cameron ordered members of his cult to assassinate the Emperor, that is Emperor Uriel Septim VII, and his known sons. They succeeded, and so the Oblivion crisis could begin. Oblivion gates popped up all over the continent, with Daedra pouring out, attacking the lands. Luckily, an illegitimate son, Martin Septim, was found, and eventually after the champion of Cyrodiil defeated Mancar Cameron, Martin was able to use the Amulet of Kings to shut the gates of Oblivion and defeat Dagon just in time. The Septim dynasty, however, had come to an end due to the actions of Mancar Cameron and his cult. This was a huge turning point in the Elder Scrolls timeline and has forever changed Tamriel. In fact, in only 200 years between Oblivion and Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, so much has happened, and that's only the beginning. Imagine what chain of events is going to unfold next, and only happens due to the power shift caused by the crisis. So what am I talking about here? Well, while Dagon was defeated, it's wise to remember he's also the Daedric Prince of Revolution and Change. Revolution and Change is definitely what followed in the wake of the Oblivion crisis. At the time, the Empire had control of all of Tamriel, however, the Empire was weakened greatly by the Daedric invasion, and looked even weaker because they pulled forces out of other provinces who were suffering in order to help defend the Heartland. Blackmarsh seceded from the Empire and later would go on to invade Morrowind, which probably wouldn't have happened if Blackmarsh was still under Empire control. This led the Dark Elves to become much weaker than before and increased hostility between the two races. The Thalmor also rose to power, which is the most important part, as it could lead to a time where Elven forces are, without a doubt, the biggest power in all of Tamriel. The Thalmor took credit for saving their people in the crisis. They got control of Somerset Isles, aggressively gained control of Valenwood, and told the Khajiit they brought back the two moons after they somehow vanished, therefore gaining a strong alliance and ultimately control of them as well. Then various events led to the Great War, which culminated in the signing of the White Gold Concordat, the banning of Talos worship, and as a result, the Civil War in Skyrim with the birth of the Stormcloaks. The Red Guards of Hammerfell also seceded from the Empire, viewing their actions as weak, as I said when talking about Fran Dahl, and fighting the Thalmor out of their own province independently. The Empire is fractured, the Old Mary Dominion is on the rise, and Tamriel has been changed dramatically and likely will be even more so affected by this in the years to come. As you can see, Mancar Cameron and his cult did a lot more than you might have realized. I just can't wait for Elder Scrolls 6 to find out what's next. And with that said, we come to the end of this Elder Scrolls lore video, the second installment uncovering the cause and effect of 4 very significant mortals on the Elder Scrolls timeline. Thank you so much for tuning into FudgeMuppet. We really appreciate all the support we've been getting across all of our Elder Scrolls lore videos, and we'd love to hear what other topics you want us to cover soon. If you haven't already subscribed, I'd strongly recommend doing it if Elder Scrolls lore is something you're also really passionate about, but if not, thanks for watching anyway. Any feedback in the comments section would be greatly appreciated, and remember that any relevant lore videos we've made involving these characters can be found in the description. Social media links can be found in the description below as well. My name is Michael, and I look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.